Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Monday the 23rd of January. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is Scotland at 7. This evening, we have a slightly different programme for you. First, I have the news headlines. Then I will introduce our guest for this evening. Then I have our latest daily update from Ukraine on day 334 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. And then we'll discuss today's headlines from Ukraine and also other key stories which have come from Ukraine and which have resonated around the world. Firstly, the news headlines. Rishi Sunak has told ethics advisor to investigate suggestions that Nadim Zahawi was forced to pay a fine and millions of pounds in unpaid taxes to HMRC, acknowledging that there were questions that need answering. The move puts Mr Zahawi, the Conservative Party chair, under further intense scrutiny, but as the UK government tries to deflect calls for him to be sacked. Richard Sharp's selection as BBC chair is to be investigated by William Shawcross, the Commissioner for Public Appointments, amid allegations he helped Boris Johnson secure a loan of up to £800,000 weeks before he was recommended for the job by the then Prime Minister. The UK's impending economic recession could be twice as bad as previously thought, according to the leading economic forecasters at the business consultancy EY. Reduced government support, higher taxes, and an overall worsening outlook have all led the firm's analysts to conclude that the next 3 years could be worse than they anticipated 3 months ago. The Glasgow North MP Anne McLaughlin has urged the UK government to ban energy companies from forcing households onto prepayment energy meters after Ofgem opened an investigation into energy companies' use of the practice. And responding to the announcement that the UK Government Equalities Minister, Kemi Badenoch, had joined Scottish Secretary Alistair Jack in refusing to appear before Holyrood's Equalities, Human Rights and Civil Justice Committee, the SNP MSP Emma Roddick called their response a disgraceful insult to the Scottish Parliament. And the Law Society of Scotland and the Scottish Solicitors Bar Association have agreed to an £11 million package from the Scottish Government that increases fees for legal aid lawyers in Scotland and also supports the country's court recovery programme. Now, I'm delighted that we are joined this evening from Kyiv by Iuliia Mendel. Iuliia is a Ukrainian journalist and political advisor. She was born in Kherson Oblast and educated at university in Kyiv. She worked as a communications consultant at the World Bank and has contributed journalistic reporting for the New York Times. She also worked as a journalist for other media outlets, including Politico Europe, the Atlantic Council, Vice, Spiegel Online and Forbes. She worked as a journalist for ICTV, Espresso TV, 112 Ukraine and Inter TV channels, and then she won a competition to be the press secretary. It was announced by President Vladimir Zelenskyy on the 30th of April 2019 that she had beaten 3,900 other contestants, and she was appointed to the role on the 3rd of June 2019 and served in that role until the 9th of July 2021. Iuliia has now written a book, The Fight of Our Lives. It's a frank and moving inside account as she tells the story of President Zelenskyy's improbable rise, from popular comedian to the president of Ukraine. Iuliia had a front row seat to many of the key events preceding the 2022 Russian invasion, from attending meetings between Zelenskyy and Putin and other European leaders, visiting the front lines in Donbass, and fielding press inquiries after the infamous phone calls between Donald Trump and President Zelenskyy that led to Trump's first impeachment. Her book is the first story from Ukraine after the Russian invasion, and the book provides crucial context on these monumental historical events. Iuliia, good evening. How are you this evening?
Well, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to talk to your audience again. As you said, it was 330 days when I was here last, and I hope that we can have like a good substantial analysis of what's going on in Ukraine.
Well, I certainly hope so, thank you. I certainly very clearly remember the last time you joined us on Broadcasting Scotland, which was on Sunday, the 27th of February 2022. A very busy weekend and a very difficult time for you, so I'm delighted that you've been able to join us again this evening. What, as I said, we'll do first is we'll have our usual daily update from Ukraine, and then you and I will look at aspects of the ongoing conflict and around the conflict, and discuss as much as we can with regard to what your understanding of the situation is, particularly from Kyiv, where you are at the moment. But the update, firstly, is that Germany's approval for the re-export of Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine is of secondary importance, as Poland could send those tanks as part of a coalition of countries, even without its permission. That's according to the Polish Prime Minister, who said so today. Germany's Foreign Minister, Annalena Baerbock, she commented yesterday that her country would not stand in the way of Poland sending these tanks to Ukraine, is causing a little bit of confusion in Berlin. It remains unclear whether her remarks are indicative of a shift in the German government's position. The German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, has promised that Germany will continue to support Ukraine for as long and as comprehensively as necessary, adding, "Together as Europeans, in defence of our European peace project." Germany's new defence minister, Boris Pistorius, plans to visit Ukraine soon. 18 people who were injured as a result of last weekend's rocket attack on a high-rise building in Dnipro remain in hospital, and that includes one child. Russia is claiming to have made advances in the Zaporizhia region, and the Russian state-owned news agency TASS is reporting that Russian forces claim to have destroyed a large Ukrainian ammunition depot in the Kherson region. The European Council President, Charles Michel, has urged the bloc's national leaders to push forward with talks on using $300 billion worth of confiscated Russian central bank assets for the reconstruction of Ukraine. Russia has said it is downgrading diplomatic relations with the NATO member Estonia, accusing Tallinn of total Russophobia. Latvia will downgrade its diplomatic ties with Russia and inform its Russian ambassador to leave the country by the 24th of February. Russia said on Monday that no new date has been set for talks with the US on the New START nuclear arms treaty, accusing the US of ramping up tensions between the two sides. The French President, Emmanuel Macron, has said that he does not rule out the possibility of sending Leclerc main battle tanks to Ukraine. The Ukrainian President, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, has vowed Ukraine will not tolerate corruption and has promised forthcoming key decisions on uprooting it this week. The EU has made anti-corruption reform one of its key requirements for Ukraine's membership to the bloc, after granting Kyiv candidate status last year. And Norway's army chief has estimated that 180,000 Russian troops have either been killed or wounded in the course of the conflict, while the figure for Ukrainians is 100,000 military casualties and 30,000 dead civilians. So, Iuliia, having listened to the daily update from Ukraine this evening, I was going to talk to you about, in particular, the diplomatic developments between Estonia, Latvia, and Russia. Russia is downgrading diplomatic relations with Estonia and is accusing Tallinn of total Russophobia, and Latvia will also downgrade its diplomatic ties and expel the Russian ambassador by the end of next month. So do you think, is this an indication of continuing nervousness amongst the Baltic states, but also an ongoing determination between them to work together?
Well, let me say that definitely the Baltic states, as those countries that border Ukraine, like Poland or Moldova, they feel the threat of Russia as real threat for themselves, because they understand that Russia has very huge imperialistic ambitions, and they understand that if for some reason Ukraine fails, they are the next. So what the Baltic states, Poland and Moldova are doing right now, they are actually defending themselves by helping Ukraine as much as possible. Today, Tallinn announced that they will provide absolutely all 155 howitzers to Ukraine that Estonia has available. And that is like a very, very big step, because this is unprecedented step. And they say, we will do everything so that Russia does not move forward, because this is the moment, exactly the moment when Russia can collapse. We cannot provide Russia a chance, a time to recharge and to attack again. So I think that the relations between Baltic states will be colder and colder, but this is not only about the Baltic states. The future of Russia and the relations with the civilized world will be very, very difficult to manage for many years forward.
Thank you, Yulia. I was going to talk to you first about a couple of what I would describe as slightly more militaristic or military stories, and then we will come back to the broader human issues and diplomatic issues as well, once we have time. But to develop the point that I was mentioning in the update, which is with regard to tanks. There's been a great deal in the press over the last few days in the UK with regard to the discussions in Europe and in the UK and the US with regard to the provision of more military equipment and particular main battle tanks. European Union foreign ministers agreed today to allocate another 500 million more euros for military aid for Ukraine, officials said, as Berlin faced more pressure over calls from Kyiv to supply it with German-made Leopard 2 tanks. Agreement over the seventh tranche of aid came as the EU's 27 foreign ministers met in Brussels. That's after Western countries failed last week to agree on sending Ukraine battle tanks, but still pledged billions of worth of support. The foreign ministers approved the European package along with a further 45 million euros for non-lethal equipment for the EU's military training mission for Ukraine. That's according to Swedish and Czech officials. We remain steadfast in our support for the Ukrainian armed forces, Sweden, which holds the EU's rotating presidency, tweeted. Meanwhile, several ministers said as they arrived at the meeting in Brussels this morning that it was key for Germany to allow Leopard 2 tanks to be sent to Ukraine. Germany's Leopard 2 tanks, fielded by armies across Europe, are widely seen as the best fit for Ukraine, but Berlin must authorise their sale and has yet to do so. Poland said today it would ask Germany for permission to send the tanks to Ukraine and also that it would send them whether or not Berlin agreed, as long as other countries did too. At this point, there are no good arguments why battle tanks cannot be provided, the Latvian Foreign Minister Edgars Rinkēvičs said as he arrived at Brussels. The Lithuanian Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis said tanks should not be held up one more day, while the Estonian Foreign Minister said Germany, as the engine of Europe, had particular responsibility to help Ukraine. Luxembourg's Foreign Minister Jean Asselborn said Russia could win the war if Europeans don't help Ukraine with what they need now. So, Iuliia, thinking a little bit about the discussion with regard to heavy armour and battle tanks, why do you think it is that the provision of this equipment is becoming so important now in arming Ukraine to defend itself?
Andrew, that's like the best question today. So let me say that today in Ukraine, we feel like there is a deja vu. Because just like literally a year ago in January, we were getting a lot of information from media, from Western intelligence, that Russia was going to attack. And as you know, many Ukrainians, they did not believe that someone can be so brutal, illogical, cynical, and, absolutely insane as Russia to do such a large-scale war in 21st century in the middle of Europe. So right now, we have the same thing. We understand that Russia is recharging, trying to recharge, trying to mobilize more people, trying to get as much weaponry as possible from North Korea, from Iran, from, its own somewhere warehouses to attack again. We actually are preparing that there will be a huge escalation, probably in March or April. And in order to be prepared not only to defend, but also to recapture those territories that Russia has been occupying since February 2022, we need to have enough modern equipment. This is very important to understand that both countries, Russia and Ukraine, are not as developed as NATO countries in weaponry. Like, we are not having so many modern, equipment, modern weapons, modern missiles, and this is definitely not the war of spares. So the victory will be by that country that will have enough modern weaponry. To have enough tanks that will help us stand on the line of confrontation and actually kick Russians out we need to have all these political decisions right now. Ukrainians need to be trained during some period of time. The tanks need to be delivered here. This all takes time. And every minute of doubt costs us lives. We're literally paying blood for every political blood now, or doubt now. For you to understand, Russia shells every day at least 8 regions of Ukraine. 8 is a quarter of my country. 8! That's unbelievably. My mother lived under shelling every day. So that's why we are asking for modern equipment, and that's why we are asking for it now, so that Russia does not move forward, so that Russia does not occupy more territories, and so that we don't pay so many thousands of lives as we predict can be possible in this future escalation.
Thank you, Yulia. That's a great explanation of the situation. There was one other, what I would call militaristic story I was going to talk to you a little bit briefly, if I may, because that's on the 14th of January, during a massive missile strike, the Russians hit a multi-story residential building in Dnipro. At least 45 people were killed, including 6 children. And as I mentioned earlier, 18 people injured as a result of that attack are still in hospital. That the strike involved the use of a Kh-22 Buria missile. Those are missiles designed to destroy aircraft carriers at sea. And the UK Ministry of Defence has stated that such missiles are highly inaccurate and therefore can cause severe collateral damage and casualties. Andriy Kostin, Ukraine's Prosecutor General, said at present fragments of the missile have been found, which preliminarily allow us to identify it as a hypersonic cruise missile of the Kh-22 type. And according to the Prosecutor General's office, about 100 people have died across Ukraine as a result of the use of this particular missile in different parts of the country. So I'm no military expert, but I can read that this missile travels at Mach 4.1. It carries a 950 kilogram warhead. Only the US Patriot missile systems can shoot it down. So the use of such a weapon against civilian targets, does that amount to anything more than terrorism? And do you think it's a war crime?
Andrew, I'm sure that this is a war crime, and I'm sure that everything that Russia is doing here is nothing less but terrorism. There is so much indignity and anger in every Ukrainian for what they are doing every day with the people you cannot imagine. This anger provides us ability to stand because we feel like we're standing against the evil. But for you to understand, living under this even psychological terrorism first, and then understanding that the air is poisoned because every moment there can be either a drone or a missile and it can kill, and you don't know if you will be there or your beloved ones or friends. So on 14th of January there was like a huge air alert around Ukraine, and I was hiding in the bathroom, and my neighbors, they were hiding in the corridor. There was no light, exactly as now, right now. And many people around the country, they went onto the metro stations or to the bomb shelters or to the ceilings or to the bathrooms. And then I see the destruction of this house, and there is a woman around my age, and she is sitting near the bathroom. And I understand, there is a bath tube there because she was sitting there, hiding. And I understand this is exactly the story that is happening around the country, that people are trying to find, extra wall or extra floor, anything to just, sit this time and understand there is a chance that I will die, but there is a chance I will survive. And then you see that somebody did not. Oh, I've got a light, by the way. Yeah, yeah, some positive here, right? Yeah, sorry. So the thing is
Okay.
that for us, it's like everyday life, right? And we understand that every time we count a lot of victims. The thing is that I'm really very proud of my people, because I saw that many volunteers, they collected a lot of things that were needed. People donate blood, people bring medicine, people bring warm clothes, food, shelters, tents, anything that is needed. But for us, what is Russia doing is compared to the worst nightmare of the World War II. And even if now it's a bit reduced, we understand that they can make the state hotter any moment when they decide to. So within this, I would like just to say that I don't know any Ukrainian who thinks that there can be any hope of renewal of any relations with Russia in the years and years and years ahead.
Thank you, Iuliia. And we will touch on it later in a little while, but I should have said at the top of the program, your very sophisticated mood lighting that was lighting you when we began the program was as a result of the emergency blackouts in the electricity system where you are in Ukraine. But we will touch on that later, but I'm delighted that power has been restored in the middle of our program this evening, which is great to see. Let's move on now, because in March last year, the International Criminal Court launched its formal investigation in Ukraine. The intervening period has featured a steady stream of information regarding possible crimes, the great majority committed by Russian forces, including torture, execution, sexual violence, kidnapping, and, as we've already been discussing, the targeting of civilians and civilian facilities. The court's investigation has broad access and ample resources compared to many other past or ongoing court investigations. In several other situations, including Sudan, Libya, Palestine, Myanmar, and the Philippines, the prosecutor's office has either lacked access to the territory or has faced significant obstacles in taking investigations forward. By contrast, the chief prosecutor, Edinburgh-born Karim Khan KC, has already visited Ukraine several times, and in April he travelled to the then newly liberated city of Bucha to view the mass graves and to hear firsthand about the alleged atrocities committed there. Khan visited again in June when he journeyed to Kharkiv and held meetings with various Ukrainian government ministries. The prosecutor described his ICC team that he has sent to the country as the largest ever single field deployment by his office since it was established. The substantial investigation team appears to be working in Ukraine on a near permanent basis. Karim Khan stated in a recent interview that court personnel had visited Izium and Kharkiv and that they were on the ground during recent Russian missile strikes on Ukrainian cities. The recent Ukrainian advances are likely creating substantial new opportunities for these investigators. Their ability to visit areas that Russian forces have evacuated should allow them to document vital evidence of crimes. In some places, the speed of the exit likely limited the Russian forces' ability to destroy evidence and equipment and otherwise cover up atrocities that may have been committed. So, Iuliia, with regard to the investigation into the alleged war crimes, for example, that we have been told that were committed at Bucha, what have you been hearing about the investigation since it began in the summer?
Well, first of all, let me say that human rights organizations work in Ukraine very closely with Ukrainians in several directions. One of them, of course, they go to the place where all these crimes were committed. And let me remind you that every time when we deoccupy the territory, we find huge mass graves with dozens and even hundreds of people buried there, mostly civilians, sometimes tortured, raped, with tied hands, with tied eyes, etc., etc. So they're fixing this. But the second thing, what the human rights organizations are doing in Ukraine, they're actually teaching Ukrainians, activists, and journalists to collect the evidence correctly, to have the legal basis for every war crime in Ukraine. Let me say that it's really very, very difficult right now. Yeah, probably, you see everything by your eyes when there is the deoccupied territory, but also around 15% of Ukrainian territory is now under Russian occupation. And we saw already the satellite images, and the satellite images show that, for instance, in Mariupol, sorry, do you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can. Yes, I
Sorry,
can,
do you
Iuliia.
hear
Don't
me?
worry. Yes, I do. We're encountering a couple of difficulties. We are
Sorry.
speaking to
Hi.
Iuliia.
Do you hear me?
Here we are.
Hello.
Yes, we can hear you, Iuliia.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I probably had some connection problems. So the thing is that there are still a lot of war crimes that we cannot reach and can and then trying completely destroyed. Evidence will be the people and men are under occupation or the, the, the scale of all the atrocities and crimes of different directions, they are so multiple, so that it's really to say what we will actually reveal when we collect all the information. But Frank, for us, every time it's like watching a Hollywood horror happening every day. So the Office of the President called for multiple organizations and international partners and private legal companies to work on the issue of the war crimes in Ukraine, to work, to make the tribunal for those who commit and organize those crimes work in the future. And right now the work is very active. And of course, I hope that in the future, all those people who were committing those crimes and who were given the orders to do these crimes, they all.
There we are. Thank you, Iuliia. As happens from time to time when we're broadcasting, we encounter some difficulties. We encounter some difficulties with the communication. We will persist and we will carry on. We can see you and we can hear you loud and clear just now, so don't worry.
Okay,
and we'll
thank you.
keep going. Even if we lose connection, we will connect. We will reconnect, and we will persist because it's important that we speak to you. I was going to develop the topic of international criminal justice a little bit further with you, because earlier today, the German Foreign Minister, Anna Baerbock, called for a specialist tribunal to be established to get around the fact that the International Criminal Court cannot prosecute Russia for the leadership crime of aggression. But there are major hurdles before any such court could be created, let alone put Russian leaders on trial. Germany's foreign minister said that a special tribunal would fill a severe gap in international law. As we've been discussing, the Hague-based International Criminal Court launched an investigation in March into war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine, but it was able to do so because Kyiv accepted its jurisdiction, even though neither Russia nor Ukraine are members of the court, which was set up in 2002. But while changes to the ICC's governing Rome Statute gave it powers to prosecute aggression from 2018, it still cannot do so for non-member states. The only way it can do that is by referral from the UN Security Council, but Russia, with its permanent seat, would automatically veto that. The UK has offered qualified support for the creation of a special tribunal capable of holding Russian civilian and military leadership, including Vladimir Putin, to account for war crimes. The government has said it invited Ukraine to join a group of other international partners pursuing a mechanism for accountability and has encouraged other G7 countries to take part. The government had been resisting the tribunal proposal because legal advisors feared it would undermine the existing International Criminal Court, but the campaign for a specialised court has been led by the British barrister Philip Sands KC, the former Labour Prime Minister Gordon Brown, and the Ukrainian government itself. And earlier today, Andriy Yermak, a senior Ukrainian government advisor, said at an event at the World Economic Forum in Davos that we need to create a special international tribunal to punish Russia's top political leadership, that it is guilty of the crime of aggression. Ukraine, jointly with partner states, is doing everything possible to reach this goal. So, Iuliia, whilst on the one hand the war is still ongoing, do you think is there enough speed being made in making progress in establishing a specialist tribunal which would have the powers to bring Russian military and political leadership before them and to hold them to account?
Well, first of all, let me say, Andrew, that this case shows that the world actually was not prepared to such level of, war crimes and to such level of insanity that Putin is doing in Ukraine and actually expanding this many, problems around the world with this war. But second, it's really great that there are so many people who are committed to try to find the solution. And this involves private companies, but also the most important, multiple governmental institutions and intergovernmental institutions. As you know, the European Parliament also voted for creating such a tribunal where Mr. Putin can be prosecuted. I think the major question, which worries, creates concerns from multiple Ukrainians, is actually how to do this. In fact, for the reason that Putin is hiding very deep in Russia. Putin has very strong autocracy. Putin's war criminals are coming back. If alive, they get multiple medals and they are perceived as heroes back home. And even if we hear different interceptions of their calls where they recognize that they're doing terrible things here, back home, they are not considered to be criminals. So this is actually one of the major questions, not only about the legal issues, but also about how actually make the law works when the mechanism for the tribunal, for the court is established. But let me say that every Ukrainian believes that the new, let's say, Nuremberg must take place, because all these people who committed, who thought of such terrible crimes, who planned all of this, who were doing this, they must be held accountable. They must be jailed. They must be punished.
Thank you, Iuliia. That's very clear. Now, I was hoping to move on with you to discuss more about the impact on the people of Ukraine, both who have remained in Ukraine and also who have travelled. At a simplistic level, as we mentioned, the power supply in Kyiv is still not dependable at the moment, as you would expect in a war zone. And there were emergency blackouts in 5 areas of Ukraine, I think, today, across power plants that had been damaged by Russian missile and drone attacks on the 14th of January, and those were supplies in Kharkiv, Dnipropetrovsk, Zaporizhia, Lviv, and Volyn province, and that was this morning. But I was going to, so that's a very simple demonstration of the impact on people. However, I was going to talk to you a little bit more about how the Ukrainian people are hanging on to their lives and hanging on to life. And I was thinking perhaps about what you've seen with regard to the impact perhaps on young people, or perhaps the impact on old people. How are they coping with a war raging around them?
First of all, Andrew, let me say that we feel a lot of huge power of unification here, because it's like unification under the same problems, right? And there is such a huge determination. It's like a mission of every Ukrainian right now to make this country survive. For multiple people around the world, for millions, probably that was just one of, post-Soviet countries near Moscow, nothing more. But for millions of Ukrainians here, this is our home. This is exactly where we were born. This is exactly where we were planning our life, making careers, falling in love, making families, planning future life, and building the country. It was difficult. It was a democratic, difficult path with all these intrusions from Russia, with all this trying to penetrate in every sphere of our life, with huge challenges, but we were moving forward. And Ukraine is the biggest territory of democracy and the biggest territory of freedom in all this post-Soviet space that collapsed in 1991. So the thing is that uh, uh, nowadays a lot of men, they went to the front lines. My husband went to the front lines in spring. He was back, and I feel like the pain of every Ukrainian female who has her beloved one, son, husband, fiance in the trenches there. It's a terrible, terrible experience to feel, if there is a connection, if there is SMS, why didn't he read the SMS? But I was talking to the soldiers. I was traveling to the front line. I was talking to soldiers on over the telephone, and they are very angry. And they say, "Doesn't matter what will happen, the army will stand." And this is like the strongest feeling, because thousands of these people, they used to be, businessmen, white collars, just going to work, IT guys, artists, singers. Now they are at the front line. If you talk about older people, I have a granny. She is now in Kiev. She is originally from Kherson region, and her village, Alexandrivka, is fully destroyed. Like there is no any house that has not been damaged there. Like every house. I saw the house of another my granny who has died already, and there is a huge missile there, just in the room where I was drawing as a kid. There was like a room I was watching black and white Soviet TV and drawing, kids' drawings, and there is a huge missile standing there. And this house needs to be demined, but it's like 17,000 on the list of the things that need to be demined. But another, my granny fully lost her house. She was sitting in the basement. There was shelling. The shelling was destroying her garden, house, all her life. We took her to Kiev. She's, here for the first time in her life. She took the elevator and went to the 8th floor. So people, trying to adapt. People are trying to learn how to live. But to be frank, Ukrainians are missing the peaceful life so much. So many people are saying that we want our life back. This is so important. We want to rebuild, and we will put all our energy to rebuild as fast as possible. But right now, we understand that we need to kick Russians out. They're like unstoppable, and this is our mission to stop them.
Thank you, Iuliia. That's a great explanation of the circumstances there for people young and old. I was going to talk to you with regard to the human aspect of the war also, in terms of those who have been displaced. Now, arguably, one of the things that connects Scotland and Ukraine is that both countries have a very large diaspora. Our people travel widely around the world, as you say, to raise families and to work, and travel more generally. And it struck me that in the current circumstances in Ukraine, there are perhaps two diaspora. There are those who have been displaced and who have sought refuge from the fighting across Europe. There are about 20,000 Ukrainians here in Scotland at the moment. But also there's a second diaspora, those who have been forcibly removed from Donbass, and who have disappeared and who have been taken to Russia. So thinking of either of those diaspora or both of them, what is the response and what is the feeling of the people in Ukraine with regard to those who have been displaced at the moment?
Well, a lot of thoughts on this matter. Let me say, first of all, thank you for every person who understands how difficult it is for a refugee to get out of the country. I have few friends, they have kids and they moved out, and I stayed here in Ukraine. That was our decision. But I was thinking, if I were having a kid, I don't know if I stayed here, because this is like a danger, and this is psychologically different. Even if you don't see this, missile hitting here, even if your windows don't shake, from missiles. It's still very psychologically difficult. So I understand many moms who went out from Ukraine to save, their children, and I'm very grateful, because I understand that it's so difficult to have new integration in the society with probably different culture, with probably different aspects. Second, almost all my friends who moved out, they either were back or they said that they will be back as soon as it is possible to be back. And I see that many Ukrainians, they miss home. Actually, Ursula von der Leyen, the head of Euro Commission, said that from 8 million of Ukrainians who were hosted in the European Union, around 5 million were back. So I hope from other parts of the world, Ukrainians were back too. Also, I wanted to say that the mayor of Kiev said that the number of people who live in Kiev already almost resumed to the level that was pre-war, before war. Before war, we had 3.8 million of people living in Kiev. Now we have 3.6 million, and we literally have no parking slots free. We have traffic jam here. So I feel like Ukrainians, they are very devoted to home. The second story that you said about being taken to Russia, I've heard multiple of these stories. And, you know, first of all, people pass through filtration. this is very difficult because many of them are separated from the families, and you never know what's happening with another person, where he or she is taken. Second, they check everything. They check even the bodies with the tattoos. They check the numbers. They have some bases where they can check if you have someone who is working in the governmental sector or in the military sector or in the law enforcement. And that causes problems for these people. And maybe they are detained or disappear. But I also know that all these Ukrainians who were taken to Russia, they do not have, sometimes they run from Russia through Estonian border. And I know that they go there without documents, without cell phones, without money, without anything. I know Estonians who help hundreds of Ukrainians every week just to go through, to, somehow recharge, to find themselves and to understand where to go and where to move forward. And I think that for us, it will be very difficult to count how many people were taken away, how many people were lost or detained. It's even very difficult to put them in the list and to understand if we need to get them back. But it's also very difficult about kids, because by Ukrainian preliminary data, 13,000 of Ukrainian kids were taken to Russia. My mom, she's a pediatrician, and she had 4 kids who were abandoned before and during the war, and she spent with them 10 months. And Russians wanted to take these kids to Russia. And for some reason, she manipulated and she didn't allow to do this. And now she has made them Ukrainian documents, and one of these kids already was adopted. So this is like a personal, heroic story of my mom, and I'm very proud of her. But what about all those 13,000 of kids who were taken to, different families or orphanages or whatever? Will they be a new Putin's army, like in 10 years, sent here just to kill and to being killed? This is a terrible thing. So yes, I don't think that Ukrainian population definitely reduced a lot. We don't know how many Ukrainians live here right now, but we hope when when the war is done and Ukraine starts rebuilding, we will be able to find people from Russia, and that Ukrainians will come from different Western countries where they've been hosted. But let me again thank you, because I know how difficult it is not only to move out, but also to accept, to integrate all those people. And, this definitely brings changes to the society.
It certainly does, Iuliia. And thank you also for that personal story from your mum, explaining the circumstances that she has encountered with regard to young people being removed, or attempts to remove young people from Ukraine and take them to Russia. Excuse me. Now, also, there was one other aspect of the human side of the war I wanted to speak with you about, because I'm aware that on the 22nd of January 1919, the Unification Act was proclaimed, joining the Ukrainian People's Republic and the Western Ukrainian People's Republic into a single independent state. That day has traditionally been associated with images of people holding hands to form living chains representing a strong and united Ukraine. Since Russia's latest aggression against Ukraine began almost a year ago, people around the world have been forming living chains to express their solidarity with Ukrainians and denouncing Russia's invasion, and also sharing hope for a peaceful future. So I was interested to think about the concept of Unity Day in Ukraine yesterday. What do you think? Can you help me understand what has happened to the population as a result of the aggression and the war? Do you think, has the population become more united? And perhaps, are there any examples of how that manifests itself? For example, are people speaking Ukrainian more and Russian less, or are there other changes that are appearing?
Well, Andrew, I think every day in Ukraine since the invasion is a unity day. We feel
Yeah.
really as united as never. The language issue is a very interesting one, and in my book, The Fight of Our Lives, I really devote a lot of time explaining this, particular issue in Ukraine about the language. Let me say that Ukrainian language has been banned by Russian Empire for at least 40 times. So for Ukrainians, it's a very painful trauma, and it was used by many politicians trying to divide society. Especially Russian propaganda was trying to claim that we are, Ukrainian Nazi or whatever, etc., etc. It doesn't make any sense. My family is Russian speaking. I am Ukrainian speaking. My husband is Russian speaker. Like Ukraine has Russian speaking regions in the east and in the south, and mostly other part of Ukraine is speaking Ukrainian. But the thing is says that Russia tried to pretend with propaganda that they came to defend Russian speakers, but in fact, what they did, they destroyed the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine. And let me say that once my mom said that she never believed that the army that was fighting Nazi turned into fascists by themselves. That's what she meant when Russians came to Kherson and occupied it. And that was like the biggest, change of everything in worldview of the people who might have had some kind of nostalgia towards Russia. And yes, after Russian invasion, many influencers they switched into Ukrainian, many businesses they switched into Ukrainian, for the reason that Russian feels like a language of a terrorism right now. Russian language includes all this propaganda, all these lies that actually costs us blood. And that's why, many people they feel like it's about their identity to speak Ukrainian, and there is no any kind of persecution or anything that doesn't work like this. This is a very civilized country, but the thing is that people really have cause and feeling, and their obligation to speak more Ukrainian to show the identity of Ukrainians. If you speak about unification, I really believe that I see this unification every day. If we have some victims, the blood centers are full of queues of people who want to donate blood. If there is a call for help for the army, there are a lot of people who come and donate money, or they bring something warm, or they buy and they go every day. And I must confess that in everyday life we don't see so many, just everyday small conflicts anymore. Like everybody feels that we are giving the fight to the biggest evil right now, and that's why as one organism we need to be united. So this is the day that showed our reality of every day, that unity day.
That's a great explanation. Thank you, Iuliia. The timeliness of it, in particular, with it being Unity Day in Ukraine yesterday. Now, I wanted also to speak to you a little bit about the most recent reports from the front line, because today Reuters reported that the top Moscow-installed official in the occupied parts of the Donetsk Oblast in eastern Ukraine said late on Sunday that he had visited the town of Soledar, which Russia claims to have captured earlier this month. Denis Pushilin, the administrator, published a short video on Telegram that showed him driving and walking amidst the uninhabited areas and destroyed buildings. I visited Soledar today, Pushilin said in an accompanying statement. On January the 11th, the private Russian military company Wagner said it had captured Soledar, and Russian-installed authorities in eastern Donetsk region said last week that they were in control of the salt mining town. In his statement, Pushilin said the Soledar mines were damaged and were now difficult to descend into. As a result of the localized offensive operation during January, Russian forces managed to gnaw through Ukrainian defenses and, after fierce urban fighting, seized what was left of the industrial town, previously with a population of 10,000 people. Although fighting in the area continues, sources and international monitors all agree that Ukraine does not now fully control the town. And this is the first noticeable Russian success since their forces captured Severodonetsk and Lysychansk after fierce fighting in the summer. This is also, of course, a vanity project for Yevgeny Prigozhin, the Kremlin insider in charge of the notorious Wagner Group. It's a long-desired present for Russian war propaganda, which has been craving at least some progress to demonstrate. So, two things, Iuliia. Firstly, is that a fair assessment of the current situation around Soledar? And secondly, how does Denis Pushilin driving around the remains of the town make you feel?
Look, first of all, let me say that there is the hugest difference between Russia and Ukraine in the battlefield, because for us, every human life is a value. And we are not using the strategies that Russia is doing, and it definitely uses the strategy of World War II. We will be learning this in school, how people were just sent to death by mass, so they are just, the attack is so massive with the people who do not probably even have enough equipment or weaponry, that they, die on a normal scale just to get some, small part of land. For us, it's not the variant. So I was talking to the major of the Ukrainian army, whose battalion was taken from the territory between Solidar and Bakhmut in the Donbass region. So he was telling me that the conditions of work there are terrible now. He said me that there was the temperature of minus 17 degrees by Celsius. It's around zero by Fahrenheit, and people, Ukrainian soldiers, were living in tranches for 8 to 12 days. So he told me that it's very difficult actually to fight there because there are trees and it is a very difficult field for theater field. So they were taken away for some time to recharge and to have the rest because they were fighting first in Kherson, and they took Kherson, and they were taken to Bakhmut. So from one hottest spot to another hottest spot, and people are at war for months and months. They literally need to recharge. He told me that they're not going to, just have a vacation. They are going to be treated to get, well again. They have a lot of wounds. They lost a lot of people. So some of our people are still staying near the Solidar, in the outskirts of the Solidar, and for us it's very important to stand there as much as possible, so that we get enough weaponry and we can regain as much territory as possible. The fight there is real. It's really very, very difficult. When I look at all those Russian propaganda, I must confess it's not something new for me, because Russia has been, manipulating and doing all these things since 2013, I guess, 2014. I don't know where this guy whom you named Pushilin was traveling. Actually, Pushilin is just a appointed by Kremlin person who used to be a mercenary. He is not any kind of legal, mayor or elected person. He is just a mercenary who is put there in charge and will be responsible for every loss. So their propaganda is very furious, and their propaganda tries to claim that Ukraine loses some territories. But they, in fact, are losing so many people that these territories, they don't mean so much, because Ukraine will be back again with new weaponry. About Wagner, let me say that today I read the reports from the organization that works inside the Russia, and they said that Wagner took around 50,000 of prisoners from Russian prisons to fight in Donbass. And in fact, right now, only 10,000 are fighting. All others, they either fled away, either were killed or were wounded or disappeared. So around 40,000 of Wagner people just, disappeared somewhere or were eliminated, what we can say. So I believe in Ukrainian army, for the reason that Russia said that they would capture us in 3 days, and that they will put, their president and their government. But then they left Kiev, and then they left Kharkiv region, and then they left Kherson region, thanks to the work of our Ukrainian army. And I was there in many units, and I was seeing and I was talking to them, and I knew that they were moving there. So right now, our goal is to recapture as much territory as possible, but in fact, not to give up thousands and thousands of lives of Ukrainian military just for 1 centimeter or for propaganda. This is our territory. We will be fighting for it. I cannot predict the future, but the determination is there.
Thank you, Iuliia. And that's a great link to my final topic to discuss with you this evening. As you say, you cannot predict the future. None of us can. However, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about the future. Speaking at the World Economic Forum last week, the President of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, praised the moral and physical courage of the Ukrainian people in the face of the Russian invasion. She said that Ukraine had impressed the world over the past year and has inspired Europe. She also assured Ukraine of further European support. Von der Leyen emphasised that knowledge and money are both needed to move forward with the relief and reconstruction process. She said, "Therefore, I appeal to you because we need your help. Ukraine deserves to have as much support as possible, and we need not only public sector investments, but also private investments and your knowledge," the head of the EC emphasised. So, Iuliia, are you encouraged by the words of support from Ursula von der Leyen? And to be fair to her, It's not only words. For this year, there is also 18 billion euros of financial support for Ukraine from the EU. So are you encouraged by the words and the financial support that's being committed at the moment,
Uh,
and also her focus on the future?
Andrew, first of all, I'm very encouraged that you are already raising this topic. This is very important to have media discussing it. Second, yes, I'm involved a little bit in the topic of reconstruction, and I know that there are multiple and multiple of initiatives. They are very much decentralized right now, but multiple organizations and multiple governmental structures making reports and are working on the formula of how actually to rebuild Ukraine. Let me first say that those 18 billion of committed economic support to Ukraine from the European Union is a macroeconomic support. It means this money will not go for the reconstruction of Ukraine. This is the money that will be given throughout the year to cover the deficit of our budget, actually to help us cover the debt and to help us cover, the major social issues in the country, because, Ukrainian economy is very, very fragile now. But when we are talking about reconstruction, actually, the biggest question to answer for everyone is, why should the civilized countries, Western countries, pay for the reconstruction of Ukraine if there are 300 billion of Russian assets that can be taken? And if Russia actually tried to destroy my country and destroyed so many regions and regions, actually, right? Then
Mm-hmm.
why Russia doesn't pay for it? And this is the magic question. So we are involved in the initiative that are working on the mechanism of how we actually build the system where this money can go to Ukraine and help us rebuild. This is very important. And I know that this system is becoming larger and larger and expanding. So those words that you've heard at Davos, not only from Ursula von der Leyen, but also from Goldman and Sachs, from JP Morgan, this all means that all these people are staying connected right now, and there is the network that is being formed to make this money work for Ukraine. And will be fair, Andrew, right? Not like not Scottish people, not English people, not French people, not Americans need to pay for the structure that Russia is doing in my country. Russia must pay for it, and I hope that this mechanism will be established until the war is done. By the way, I really have the hope that the first steps of ceasefire can be taken this year.
What distinguishes broadcast?
That's a great way to end our discussion this evening, Iuliia, talking about the future and talking about the ambition for a ceasefire which will save lives and protect Ukraine from further destruction. Because as always, you and I could discuss the situation in Ukraine for hours and hours. However, I'm afraid to say that's all that we have time for this evening.
Not
In making
everyone
these
can listen for
programs,
hours and hours.
well, they can. I assure you they can. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland relies on the support of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news and current affairs. Please help us to continue to make these programmes and to continue to make new programmes for you. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 per month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. We have set ourselves a target of raising £30,000 to enable us to employ staff to make more programmes. To everyone who has donated, and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you would like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, behind the scenes or in any other way, please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. You can find us on Twitter at BroadcastScot, and you can find us on Facebook by searching for Broadcasting Scotland. When you're watching us on YouTube, it would be great if you would like and subscribe to Broadcasting Scotland on that platform. Please click on the wee bell. We will be back tomorrow evening at 7 with the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please come back and join us then. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who has been watching us this evening, and of course I would like to say a very special thanks to our very, very special guest joining us live from Kyiv, Iuliia Mendel. Thank you, Iuliia, for joining us tonight.
Andrew, thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. I'm away to read Iuliia's book, The Fight of Our Lives. I hope that you have a very peaceful evening. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.